I love junk radios, and this one sort of qualifies. This will be my next project. I cleaned out the belongings of a silent key, and I got a bunch of stuff. This guy was a CB turned ham, and I think the way he got interested in ham radio was he loved to take ham radios and convert them to 11 meters. So I don't know what I'm going to run in with this HW-101. I've never owned one of these and always kind of wanted to add one to my collection. So this one, at least got the entire package. Got the HW-101, the PS-23 power supply, and the matching microphone. All the manuals, assembly manual, operation manual, everything's here. It is filthy inside. It's been sitting in a basement for probably 30 years. And there's at least one tube I see missing. The boards and all are filthy. Have no idea if he made modifications to this thing. And we'll get into it and see what we can find. Got the cabinet, even got the connecting cable between the power supply. So everything is here. We'll go for it. Some of the other things I got in this collection was several of these Siliconics model 1011s, which were 10 meters and 11 meters. There's 3 of those there. Got a national receiver here. And let's see, what else did we get? A bunch of these Heath kit single banders. Even got an SX28 down here. SX28. Always wanted one of those. I love the dials on it. Looks like a steering wheel. And these are dogs to restore, but some point we'll get to it. This did not come with that collection. I picked this up from a friend, HW-101. I'd like to do that one someday. Some of my antique radios that I've restored. Here's a real rare receiver. This is a Technical Materials Corporation receiver, and it's a GPR 92. And if you go online and research this, you'll find there was only 100 and some of them made. I just looked into this thing. Man had it in his shed, gave it to me, and it's one of 100 or so. He worked for NSA. They bought it for a project. He said it was not a very good receiver, so maybe that's the reason Technical Materials never made many of them. But they're highly collectible because of their low number that were made. So we'll get on that one day too. I've started to disassemble. Got the bottom off. Actually, everything looks nice and clean under the bottom. Whoever put this together originally, looks like the solder joints are good. A little heavy on the solder, but everything else looks okay. There's some kind of modification right here. It's made on perforated board. It looks like a modification. It's got a bracket on it that almost looks factory, but and then here is an electrolytic Kinda got a diode on it. Comes over to this little project board. Not sure what this is all about. Have to trace it out and see. Something going on down here with some masking tape wrapped around it. I'll have to get on the internet and look up HW-101 modifications and see what this might be. Everything else looks okay. Crystal filter. Top side still very dirty, but the little rubber bands here that control this, they seem to be solid, but they are slipping, so I'm sure we'll have to replace those. We usually do, from what I've read on the internet. So just got to clean it up. I'm going to continue taking this front panel off. I've got all the knobs off of it, and so I'll continue with that process. I cleaned this front panel up, and it is absolutely beautiful. That panel looks like the day it came from the factory. I can't find one scratch on this panel. The lens is a little bit foggy. I don't know, maybe they were made that way. But the front panel is perfect. So hopefully the rest of it will turn out this nice. I have downloaded a lot of pages of instructions on restoring an HW-101 and modifying it. This one I like a lot. It's northlanddrifters.net, and I like it because he goes through a step-by-step from opening it up, what to look for, and so I'm using that. And on the first page they talk about 2 electrolytics that need to be replaced. I replace all electrolytics anyway, so I've replaced those 2, one here, one up there, and one on the bottom. He said there were 3 more small ones. I found one on the bottom. I haven't found the other 2 yet. I've got to find it. So now I'm cleaning the board. I wanted to clean the boards before I start checking resistors. I want to check every resistor. And so I will see if I can keep this thing out of the glare. I'll tell you my technique for cleaning something like this guy. I think he takes all the boards out, unsolders all of those wires going to the boards, and takes them out and washes them real good. But my technique is simply to just spray them with soapy water. I'll let them sit a little while actually, but then I got my Harbor Freight. But then I've got my Harbor Freight chip brush that I use to brush between everything best I can. I'm not taking those boards out. And so I'll do that, and then after I do that, I spray clear water on it, so it just kind of drain down. All the dirty stuff will drain down to the bottom. And then after that's all done, I'll dry them with my heat gun. Just lightly sweep them with the heat gun to dry everything out. So that's my technique. I've ordered parts for the HW-101, ordered a new dial and a new little panel that goes behind in front of the dial, and the rubber bushings, bands, O-rings that control those tuning capacitors. So while I'm waiting on those, I'll take a look at this PS-23 power supply. So oh my God. Look at the cobwebs and the dirt and the grime, and this thing was sitting in a basement for many years. So the good news is I don't think it was ever used much. It ought to be okay. I have to restuff these caps. 125 microfarad, 500 volt. 4 of them there. Power transformer needs to be painted. Just like the HW-101, the cabinet doesn't look that bad. I don't see any major scratches or anything anywhere. It just needs to be cleaned up. So a lot of dirt, but I've started to disassemble this PS-23 power supply, taken one of the capacitors out, and interesting, I've seen a lot of photos of these power supplies, and in most cases they have like a fiber covering on them, but these are different. They've got it's the standard metal can electrolytic, but looks like heat shrink tubing covering it, and it's made by Nichicon, but it has a Heath kit part number on it, 25265, so it must have been put in originally. So I'm going to stuff these. There's a guy on eBay and other places that sells a kit to rebuild these, and everything of course is miniaturized, today's technology, and it all goes on one little printed circuit board and mounts on top, and I'd probably be money ahead if I did that, but I just got this thing about anything I restore, cars or radios or anything else, is looking like the original, so I'm going to see if I can restuff these. I've already ordered electrolytics to go inside of them. So we'll continue on. I'm starting to recap these electrolytics on this PS-23 power supply. And so what I've done is I've taken my Dremel tool and cut a groove all the way around that, basically cutting the bottom off of it. And so I can pull the bottom up, and I'll have to do some solder there, but I can pull that up, and then I'll start working on getting that old cap outside of that case. I want to retain these covers. I just think they're kind of neat. It's a metal can, but it's got like heat shrink tubing over it, and I think they look kind of neat, and so I want to retain that look. And normally I would take my heat gun and heat these up real good and they'll slip out, but I don't know if I'm going to be able to do that with this covering. I'm hoping I can get it warm enough without destroying this plastic cover that's on there. I think it's just heat shrinkable tubing, so it ought to take some heat, and so we'll see how that goes. These turned out to be much easier than I thought. They looks like they had poured some kind of liquid rubber on top of it, and I was able to just take my screwdriver and pry that off, and then underneath there was a little plastic cover which came off quite easily, and once that came off, this capacitor was able to pull out easily. So these are easy to get the old cap out of. Just got to clean all the crud out of the inside of it, and we'll be in business. I sanded all the rust off of these transformers and the choke. I taped everything up except for that, and painted them black, so we should have a good looking chassis here in a little while. The original chassis is in real good shape. Once again, I think I only found one bad spot on it. One of these corners had a little bit of rust down at the bottom where it had been sitting on concrete or something, and but it's still a nice green color, and I think it's going to be a good looking power supply when we get finished here. And as I've said so many times before, I don't know why it matters, because once I get this thing working, I'll set it up on the shelf and probably not ever touch it again for a long time. I'd like to make a few contacts with it before I retire it. So I think this is going to look real good, and I've got these areas here where this paper that goes around the coils, it's all taped up too. So anyway, it's going to be good. This base on this electrolytic capacitor, this terminal is loose. Of course, when it was attached to the capacitor, it gave it some rigidity, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to take it, I'm going to mix me up a little JB weld and put it around that to make that a good firm connection. The other thing is this, all these ground connections around the outside of this, I think what I'll do is I'm going to take the capacitor. I got these capacitors today. This is 150 mics at 500 volts, and they're kind of loose in this can, but I've got a solution for that. I've got some foam rubber, sheets of foam rubber that are about 3/60 of an inch thick with sticky stuff on the back. I'll wrap around that, and that'll make that a good snug fit inside of that can. Of course, I'll run the positive connection to this loose terminal, loose now, and I think I'll bring the negative out and drill a hole in this phenolic base and bring it out and connect it to one of these ground terminals. That way that whole ring will be securely grounded to the capacitor, the negative side of the capacitor, because I'm going to be JB welding the two halves of this back together, and I'm not sure I'll get a real good connection between the bottom and the top, good electrical connection, and if I run that wire out on the negative side, it should solve the problem. I cut the bottom off of these electrolytics, and to secure that little positive terminal, I've epoxied all of them, some JB weld, and that's in the process of drying. I am just amazed at how easy those capacitors came out of those metal shells. I mean, they were no problem whatsoever. So I'll give that a day or so to dry, and we'll continue on with recapping these. One of the benefits of doing this is on these that have these big 2-watt resistors mounted to the bottom, you don't even have to take those loose. You can just leave all of that assembled, and I'm able to get that through the hole in the chassis completely assembled, so I don't have to take all that apart, and makes that job a whole lot easier and do a lot less damage to your resistors, and glad about that. So this is what this assembly looks like. I was able to solder that positive pin directly to that positive terminal. Comes out of the base of that capacitor. It's got this nice little fork on the inside that you can bend around that tiny little pin on that electrolytic capacitor. Then on the negative side, I ran a piece of stranded wire up through a hole in the base, and I'll attach that to the ground solder lugs around that ring. Also put rubber strips. This is adhesive rubber strips, some stuff I've got around it to secure it so it doesn't flop around inside the can. Actually had to double up on one of them to get the diameter just right. The other thing I did was, this base has a hole in it, but I was still worried about heat buildup inside. That's one reason I didn't wrap this rubber all the way around. I did strips it so it'll give it some airflow around there. A little concerned about these capacitors being inside of these cans with no really physical attachment to the can to dissipate the heat. So I drilled a hole in the top of this can as well, and I think I've got a pretty good system here. This slips in here very securely, and I actually have some little marks here so I can put it back in the exact place that it was originally, because when you're cutting these things with a Dremel tool, you don't cut them all that straight. And so now I can JB weld it back together and should have a good electrolytic capacitor. Well, if I do say so myself, I think I have a beautiful power supply here. Painted the transformer, the choke, recapped these cans, cleaned it up, even put new screws in here because the heads of the other screws were rusted real bad. And as I'd stated once before, the green part of the chassis is in real good shape. Only have just a couple of little nicks here and there. It's almost like when it came out of the box. And replaced all the electrolytics, even those small ones on the bottom. All the resistors were within tolerance, so no problems there. When I first hooked this up and hooked it up to the radio, a strange thing, it seemed the receiver was working somewhat, but when I went to put the signal generator on it to find out why it didn't seem to be getting the signal all the way through the chain, when I connected the ground lead of the signal generator to the chassis, the relays either pulled in or dropped out. I'm not sure which way they go in transmit and receive, but they were clicking, and I'm saying, what's going on here? Why would grounding the chassis cause those relays to operate? So I spent a lot of time trying to figure that out, and I thought, well, maybe it's the key. There was no key in it. Maybe that jack on that key is shorted, as it should be if there's nothing plugged in. So I plugged a plug into it to break that contact, and nothing changed. And I don't know, I spent an hour or two reading schematics and trying to figure why grounding the chassis caused the relays to operate. And then it dawned on me, I need to check, make sure that there's ground connection from this power supply to the radio. And sure enough, I had done a stupid thing. This brown wire here that goes from the accessory plug over to ground, I had left it loose. That little brown wire had gotten hidden underneath all these other wires when I was putting it back together. So there was no ground to pin 7 and therefore to the radio. And so that's the kind of stupid stuff that can cause you problems and spend a lot of your time trying to figure it out, and it's your fault all the time. So anyway, nice power supply. Proud of that. And we continue on. Still got to figure out why the receiver. The receiver is working somewhat in that. And now I can get the signal. I can hook a signal generator to it, and one of the problems I had right immediately was I had mentioned this before in an earlier video. Somebody had made a modification here. This looks like just a little RF amplifier. It uses a 2N3904, and they broke the lead from the antenna into where it hooks and starts the receiver chain, and inserted that little amplifier. I could probably give it some more RF gain, and I was basically getting nothing through the input. The signal generator wouldn't even go through, and so I finally decided just to short this thing out, bypass it, and now I have a good strong signal generator signal. Still not receiving anything when I hook the antenna to it, but as I said, I think the chain is working somewhat, because the pre-selector on the front, I can rock those back and forth and increase the noise. So just got to figure out the rest of this.